Everybody. Hello, hello. We're going to be continuing our teaching series on Corinthians. Really enjoying this. Just trying to make sure my notes downloaded. Internet's giving me a hard time, you know. What is it? Cox is only so good. While my notes are downloading, one thing I can share, I am in the process. It is so slow, by the way. I am in the process of translating the book of Ruth. And translating a book of the Bible when your Hebrew is mediocre is very challenging. And to give you perspective, it takes me an hour to translate 2 verses. I'm just real slow. And so I'm having to do a lot of looking at references and stuff. So hopefully, once that's complete, I'd like to do a teaching series through Ruth. So I'm going to do a translation, then I'll provide the translation. And that way, when you look at the translation, the purpose of the differences is to highlight the literary design of the book. So I think something like that would be fun. It'd be fun. So that's just going to take a while, though, at the pace that I'm going. There we go. We got that file downloaded. Okay. Corinthians. So we're going to be looking at 1 Corinthians chapter 8, 9, and 10. And we're going to be talking about idolatry. We're not going to talk about 1 Corinthians chapter 9. I'll save that for another time. 1 Corinthians chapter 9 is about why ministry should be able to get paid from the offering. That's what that's about. Paul makes it very plain that if you are in ministry, you should get paid from the offering, and that's reasonable. I think that would be more fitting for another conversation at another time. Not because I don't want to have it now, just because just talking about the material of chapters 8 and 10 is going to take so long that I just won't have time to cover it. So here's our roadmap for tonight, what we're going to cover. We're going to discuss what sort of reality did the biblical authors think of when they thought of idols. When we think of idols, we have certain conceptions in our mind. I want to make sure that how we think of idols align with how they would have thought of idols. Also, I want to talk about how those ideas about the nature and the reality of idols, how that impacts the teaching of idolatry. Then we're going to turn our attention to modern day idolatry. So that's kind of our roadmap. And I won't labor along with much of an introduction. We'll just go ahead and get started. I want to start off with 2 blocks of text. It's going to be from 1 Corinthians chapter 8, but also 1 Corinthians chapter 10. We're going to read from 1 Corinthians chapter 8 as well as 1 Corinthians chapter 10. And let's see. I'm going to share something on the Slack as well. It is, what I'm sharing is a version of the Old Testament. It is the English translation of the Greek Old Testament called the Septuagint. We're going to be using those verses as well a little bit later. So I want you to have access to those. If you're a friend here and you don't have access to the Slack, first of all, shame, feel bad. And then secondarily to that, share with a friend that does have. If somebody around you doesn't have it, just ask around. That way, because this is important and you do need to be able to read this. So if you don't have access to it, just copy and paste it and text it to the person. That way they can share it as well. Okay. So 1 Corinthians chapter 8, we'll start at verse 1. 1 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 1. I'm going to read 1 through 6. It says, "Now concerning things sacrificed to idols, we know that we have all knowledge. And knowledge makes arrogant, but love, it edifies. If anyone supposes that he knows anything, he has not yet known as he ought to know. But if anyone loves God, he is known by him. Therefore, concerning the eating of things sacrificed to idols, we know that there is no such thing as an idol in the world, and there is no God but one. For even if there are so-called gods, whether in heaven or on earth, as indeed there are many gods and many lords, yet for us there is but one God, the Father, whom are all things, and we exist for him, and one Lord, Jesus Christ, by whom are all things, and we exist through him. Man, sometimes I have a very distracted brain. I talk with my hands a lot. That's called gesticulate, to talk with your hands, gesticulate. I do that a lot. So just random vocab, just so you can have that. Nothing to do with the lesson, but that was just in my head. 1 Corinthians 10. So let's turn over 2 chapters. Turn over 2 chapters. And we'll start at verse 19. 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 19. What do I mean then? That a thing sacrificed to idols is anything? Or that an idol is anything? No. But I say that the things which the Gentiles sacrifice, they sacrifice to demons and not to God. And I do not want you to become sharers in demons. You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons. You cannot partake in the table of the Lord and in the table of demons. Or do we provoke the Lord to jealousy? We are not stronger than he, are we? The word there for demon is daimon. Daimon. The Hebrew equivalent is shadim. Shadim. So that's relevant because we're going to read a text in the Old Testament that has the word daimon. So that's where it's like the name Damien. Similar origin. You know, if you know someone named Damien, oops. That's all right. Their parents are probably well-meaning. So okay. Paul is trying to communicate here something fairly complex. And I wish I had a whiteboard and marker, because I'm going to need that in just a second. Whiteboard and marker. Thank you. I'm going to need that because literally just for one point, but I think it's going to help it make sense. So if this text can be confusing, because on the one hand, if you read these both together, at one point, it seems like Paul is saying there are no idols. But then at another point, he's saying there is idols. And then he's saying, are the idols anything? Is the sacrifice anything? But then he goes on to say, but if you eat with them, you're feasting with demons. And so Paul is having this moment. He's being torn back and forth. Are these spiritual beings real or not? Are the demons real or not? And we're having these questions in our mind. Are these gods real or not? And then we have all these stories in the narrative, the Gospels of Jesus casting out spirits. And so we have all this data. And I want to share what I think Paul is doing. My whiteboard's coming. Praise the Lord. She's probably looking for a marker. We lose markers so much, more than people lose their salvation. Praise the Lord. Not that we have a flimsy salvation. It's very secure. It's very difficult to lose out with God. It takes quite a bit. You got to jump over his grace to be lost. It's real hard to do. But I'll start trying to explain it here, and then we'll catch up here. So I think where some of the confusion comes in is some of our language that we use. And so, man, she came with paper towels and everything. Thank you so much. Okay. set this here. Okay, so a word that we have that's not very helpful is the word God. That word's not helpful because if you hear the word God, we think about Christian monotheism. So like that's really not helpful and it's not doing much for us, right? And so I need to give us some other terminology, and this is terminology that comes from the Old Testament that I think is helpful for laying some of this stuff out. So there's two words, a couple. I'll just do them in English today. Save us the stress. One is Elohim, B'nai Elohim, and Yahweh. Okay. So something that the biblical authors have done that I think is a disservice to like everybody trying to read the Bible is that they translated the word in Hebrew Elohim to God. Terrible translation. Terrible translation. Because let's say there's a warrior who died in battle and we're talking about his spirit, right? We use the word Elohim to describe that. When the witch of Endor brought back Samuel's spirit, they described that resurrected spirit as an Elohim, right? So that word's not helpful. There's lots of things besides the God that we serve that are being called Elohim. All you got to do is open up any app, click the word and the concordance for Elohim, read the sentences, and you'll see that it applies to everything, including our God. And so, a more helpful word is spiritual being. It's a class of existence. Basically, anything that is non-spiritual, and remember, when I say Elohim, I'm referring to the Hebrew word, not the English translation that we use for the Hebrew word. I'm not saying that all spiritual beings are God. That's a translation problem. I'm saying that the word Elohim in Hebrew should be translated to the word spiritual being. Okay. Because it's not a name. So when we say you are God, according to the Hebrew language, all we're saying is you are a spirit, which is true. He is a spirit, but the name in the Old Testament that God uses is Yahweh. So, but it's translated as capital L-O-R-D. We say the Lord as a title. It's not a title, it's a name. So that's why oftentimes when I read the Old Testament, I don't say the Lord, I'll say Yahweh, because it's a proper name. Okay. B'nai Elohim, or the sons of God, these are, for a lack of better word, you could say they're a divine council of sorts. I'll explain that in just a moment. And then Yahweh is the proper name of God, of our God in the Old Testament. So obviously we know him as Jesus. And so in the Old Testament, he went by Yahweh. In the New Testament, he goes by Jesus. Not different beings, the same being. Okay. So with this language, what's helpful is recognizing that when I say other gods exist, I'm meaning that other spiritual beings exist. And what I'm insinuating by that is that when they went to these idol statues and we went to these little statues, they were entertaining real and legitimate spiritual beings. That these were means of approaching, let's say, Aphrodite or Dionysus or Apollos or whomever they were worshiping, Moloch or whatever the name may be. Okay, these were legitimate means of doing so. And so something that's interesting, in the ancient Near East, they had a system for understanding different sorts of gods. There is like, here you would have what's called pantheon of gods, the children of the pantheon, and then servile gods. Right? And so in the pantheon, you could think of like the Greek pantheon, so Zeus and Poseidon and such. They occupy the top. And then there's like other gods who are a little bit lesser, or demigods will a lot of times be either here or here. And then we in let's say Sumerian, it'd be like Eridu or Anki or different names like that. And then their kids would be like Sin or Ivana, which is where we get Ishtar from, right? So like their kids would be, so there's like usually a group of like founding gods. They have kids, then there's second level gods. They're still powerful, but not as powerful as the first generation, the pantheon. And then there's like other spirits that like serve like messengers and stuff. There's a similar concept that happens in the Bible, except in their highest class, there were gods that could compete among each other, gods of equal power. And so the pantheon could legitimately battle with one another. That's why in a lot of creation narratives, the gods are going to war, and then the world comes into existence. It's equal forces fighting among themselves. That's not what happens in the Bible. In the Bible, at this highest level, it's just Yahweh. When we say that there is no other God, what we're in, and what I mean in a biblical point of view, I believe what the biblical authors are saying, that Yahweh exists in a class alone. There's other spiritual beings, but there's only one that has the status that Yahweh has. And that status is dictated by his nature, all-powerful. There's no other spiritual being that's all-powerful, all-knowing. There's only one being that's all-knowing, omnipresent, and we can go through all these lists, right? There's only one being that occupies that dimension. That divine council, the B'nai Elohim, they tend to operate here, and through a series of unfortunate events, of real lemony snicket moment, right? Some of these B'nai Elohim work with God, and some don't. That's a whole separate lesson, and for the time reasons, I won't get into that. But what we call principalities, I believe these principalities are in Deuteronomy 32. I have it sent there in the Slack in the Septuagint version. We can actually look at that. Deuteronomy 32, verse 7 and 8. It says, remember the days of old, consider the years. By the way, the Greek version of the Old Testament is the oldest account of the Old Testament that we have. The Masoretic text is much, much newer. The Septuagint is a couple hundred years before Jesus. The Masoretic text, which is the Hebrew text, is like 1,000 years after Jesus. Okay, so this is older than the Hebrew. So it says this, remember the days of old, consider the years of past ages. And what's interesting, you'll see how they've changed the translation. That's based off the Hebrew text. So the Hebrew and the Greek have very different translations. The Greek text will say this in verse 8, when the Most High, talking about Yahweh, he divided the nations. If you look at the translation, it says he divided the nations. And this is what he did. He separated the sons of Adam. And he set bounds. So he made the sons of Adam into nations. So it's humanity. Adam, the word for Hebrew for Adam is human. So he split humans into nations. What? According to the number of the angels of God. That's interesting. The Greek, the older translations say according to the number of the angels of God. The Masoretic text, so people who are 1,000 years after Jesus read that, got really uncomfortable and said, we're just going to change that from angels of God, because the Greek there is sons of God, is what that says. They changed it to sons of Israel because they're more comfortable with that. So, yes, that's likely what happened. Either, there's two theories. Either somewhere along the line, a Hebrew translation said sons of Israel, or they got uncomfortable and changed it. So one of the two. So either one of those is what happened, and it matters not. But looking at this, and so you know how we say that if you go to a country or a city, there's like a prince, a principality. This is their origin story. God put these angels there. And what was supposed to happen is that they were supposed to take the people's prayers and worship and send it up to God. But Psalm 82 lets us know that they rebelled against God. They rebelled. The reason why he divided the nations that way, that was a punishment to humanity. Genesis 11, the Tower of Babel, their punishment for trying to reach heaven inappropriately was they made more space between God and them. So that punishment was there's going to be an intermediary between us and God. That was their punishment. And so that's how can you ever wonder how the principalities got there? Some say there was a revolt in heaven and they fell down and that's how they got there. But then why do some of these principalities have authority? Like to me, that doesn't make sense. Even if they rebelled, how do they have authority? It's because what I like about this model is that they were put there and God gave them authority to rule. And now they're in rebellion to God. This concept makes sense if you travel overseas. Trust me, if you've been in a lot of other countries outside of the West and you interact with a legit witch doctor and you go to any of those countries where there's like a shaman or a witch doctor, people are afraid because they have real power. The problem is instead of going to God for power, they're going to a principality. The good news is because we serve Jesus as the higher power. And so whatever tactics or tricks that they have, they must be subservient. So we don't have to be worried. And so just because there's legitimate power that the shamans have or whatever religion it is, it's a subservient power, it's a weaker power because all things bow at the name of Jesus. Okay, so with all that out the way, you go into, you're in a city, and you're going to a little idol statue, and you say, I'm going to have this offering. And we're assuming that the priests did their job properly, which means they put their special uniform on and they consecrated that idol, and they did the opening the mouth ceremony, is what it's called if you want to look it up. They did that ceremony, so when they do the opening of the mouth ceremony, that consecrates that idol statue. So let's say it's a little round statue. It looks like an egg and it has like a face engraved on it. Whatever. Once it's been consecrated, when you make that offering, at that moment, whatever spiritual being that's supposed to make homage to, it indwells in that idol. And these people are having an experience. They're interacting with something. And depending on whatever rules set out by the particular deity, there's different levels of access and different things like that. So when you have that reality, you can imagine the discomfort that some Christians would have. They're like, if I eat this meat, am I honoring this idol? If I eat this meat, am I partaking in this ceremony? Am I empowering this thing? Right? And so you can see why there'd be a real tension. Because if you don't believe these idols are any real reality, then you're like really indifferent. But if they have any legitimacy to them whatsoever, it becomes a much freakier situation. You're like, I'm not trying to invite the spirit of Aphrodite into my house because that would be very troublesome. Beauty and lust and attraction and all those sorts of things. Or I don't want Ares in my house, or whoever you go through the pantheon, or any lesser known god. I don't want Dionysus and drunkenness and revelry. I don't want any of that in my house. And so, okay. And to put it into a summary, I believe that the biblical authors thought that these other spiritual beings were legitimate realities, but we have Jesus, and they're subservient realities at best, which if you have this worldview, mad disrespectful to everybody else's God is wild. That's a wild thing to say. Can you imagine going to somebody who's Hindu and saying that your God Vishnu is just a rebellious angel at best? That's a rough thing to say to somebody. Like, that's really antagonistic, all right? Or you go to our Arab friends and they're talking about Allah. You're saying that's just like that's a really provocative thing to say. And so you would imagine that Christians didn't have very many friends and Jews didn't have very many friends, because that's a very provocative thing to say. You've totally denigrated their God to a much lesser status. So it's intense. Because you could say that God's not real, and then your God's just not real, and then, well, that's just oh, well, you've never had an encounter with my God. And so they can just chalk it up to foolishness. You say, well, your God's real. He just sucks. He's just not as powerful as you think he is. His power is limited. That's a slap to the face, you know. It's like, it's one thing to say, my God's not real. That could just chalk it up to you just never experienced the presence of God. But someone to say, oh, I felt Jesus' presence. He's just, he's meh. But if you experience this God, he's much better. I'm like, bro, what are you saying right now? That's crazy. It's a different type of disrespect. Colossians chapter 2, and then we'll move on to our next point. Colossians 2, verse 13. Sometimes I be forgetting where these things are, Lord. There it is, Colossians 2. Look at verse 13. It says, when you were dead in your transgressions and the uncircumcision of your flesh, he made you alive together with him, having forgiven us of all of our transgressions, having canceled out the certificate of debt consisting of decrees against us, which was hostile to us. And he has taken it out of the way, having nailed it to the cross. And when he was nailed to the cross, this is also what he did. When he had disarmed the rulers and authorities, these are talking about the principalities, he disarmed them. And he made a public display of them, having triumphed over them through him. The forces of darkness thought they were defeating Jesus by crucifying. Little did they know that his crucifixion was his inauguration. They were installing him as king. And in that moment, the power of all principalities, they must yield to the name of Jesus. Okay, so we have this. We have this wonderful starting point. That took way longer than I wanted it to. And I don't want to make two parts out of this. I want to move on. When it's time to move on, I want to press forward. And I cut so much out, and I still took like 30 minutes on it. Okay. I'm going to go out of order, and if I have time, I'll go back to my previous point. I think this other point is a lot more important to where we are, and so I think it'd be better if I hit this, and then if I have time, I'll go back to the other one. Okay. Because all of that was educational and fun. This is convicting, and this is much more, I think, applicable. I want to talk about idols in the modern times. Most people, there's been a great rise of secularism and atheism and agnosticism. And so we have far fewer people who are building statues to Dagon and all those different things, or these sorts of practices are falling out of favor. And what will happen oftentimes is that when we think about ancient idolatry, we tend to, and this is a mistake that we make generally, we tend to think of people from a different time period as dumber than we are, which is not true. They might have had a lack of access to information, but in the same way you have somebody who has a genius level IQ today, those people existed back then. Of course, Isaac Newton struggled to be able to calculate the curvature of space, and why he couldn't explain the retrograde revolution of Mercury, right? Like his mathematics couldn't account for that. But everything else he did was right on it, though. Newton's laws of physics are still in operation. This man might have had lack of information, but I guarantee you he was more brilliant than anyone in this room. Easily. None of us could compare to Newton if we tried. But there's a bunch of stuff about this natural world that we just know because we've had access to information. He probably couldn't give you a detailed understanding about fetal development. We probably know more about fetal development than he does, honestly. I bet you couldn't create calculus. You see what I'm saying? And so the same thing is true of ancient people. We think these people worshiping gods were just foolish and had no concept of the world. They're not silly. these concepts of idol worship and God, they were trying to use a logic. A lot of idolatry was examining the world around us and trying to draw conclusions. It was really the overlap between science and religion was quite great. They were trying to make sense of, why is my world unfolding the way that it was? So they were trying to make sense of it. And one of the incredible inventions, I think, is idolatry. It's really far more incredible than we think. You see, to these old pagans, these gods weren't just fanciful ideas, but everything could be a god. And that is a profound idea. There were gods of sex, work, war, money. Every nation had a... Well, what is a god? A god is, you have a set of values, and whatever is the most valuable thing that you order your life around, that's God. Now, I'm phrasing that way because I'm a modern person. But if you see somebody who they like to hump and pump, that's all they like to do, they must be worshiping a sex god. They must be possessed by a sex spirit. They're making sense of their world. Like they're making sense of it, right? If you see somebody who's like inordinately obsessed with work and all these different things, and they're always trying to maximize their business and get things up, like, oh, they must serve a work god. Because their life and the values they live is so radically different than the people around them. Those ideas must be coming from somewhere. A work god. Or, war was far more common in that time. And so you have some people who are just exceptional warriors. They must be blessed by the gods of war. Or maybe they have psychopathy and they have no remorse in murdering and killing people, and so they're willing to be a little bit crazy, right? What we call PTSD made a great ancient warrior. They get on the battlefield and they'll just shake up whatever trauma in there, and they'll just black out and just go crazy. That blacking out and going crazy is probably a trauma response, but to the ancient mind, that's a war god possessing them. And so these weren't just fanciful ideas. They were making sense of what was going on. And the reality is, that version of reality lines up very much so with how we live. See, when you think about idolatry like that, you'll realize that form of idolatry, when the thing you worship is a concept or an idea, that never left. That's still in operation today. For example, physical beauty is a pleasant thing, but it's easy to deify it and make it the most important thing in your life. American culture is driven by our physical appearance. We have so much media about this, like the concept of a beauty standard. We are a nation obsessed with our appearance. Aphrodite would be proud. Are we not worshiping Aphrodite? We'd be no different than those ancient Greeks. We're doing the same things that they do. We beautify ourselves, right? We do all these different practices. We're no different than they are. We're the same. We just call it beauty standards. We change the language and make it sound more sophisticated, but it's the same sort of thing. These idols, they're counterfeit gods at best. You see, a counterfeit god is anything that is so central to your life and essential to your existence. Should you lose that thing, your life would hardly be worth living. With that definition, anything could be an idol. In fact, there's some people, and I'm not saying this to attack anybody, but it's just a matter of reality. Let's say, we were all teenagers at one time, right? We're a teenager and we get our first heartbreak and we feel like, I just can't keep living. I just can't. This is so hard. And you being all emotional and you're listening to like rock music and you're like, I got to process these emotions, and you get angsty and whatever, right? You were worshiping that relationship. If your life isn't worth living when you lose something, that thing was your God. And can I tell you one thing that is And that's what's scary, is that good things can become idols. And hopefully this offends everyone in the room. If not, I'll keep talking until I offend everybody. Can I tell you idols that we make acceptable in the church? The idol of family. That's okay. It's okay to worship your family. The idol of family, I'm going to worship my marriage. I'm going to worship my kids and all these things. Like, that's okay, because I want to be a good spouse, or I want to be a good parent. Okay, we'll leave it there. I have more to say, but we'll work into it. Anything can be made into an idol. The idol has a controlling position in our heart. It's when you're really worshiping something as an idol, you'll spend your passion, your energy, your emotional and financial resources on this thing, and you won't even give it a second thought. It can be family, it can be children, it can be a career, it can be making money, it can be achievement, it can be the respect of others. It can be something as small as, well, I got to make sure I save face in a social setting, so I want to make sure my social standing is good, right? It can be romantic relationships, approval from your peers, competence. It's a struggle that I deal with. I like to want to be perceived as competent. Competence and skill. Oh, this is a good one. Security. A comfortable circumstance. It can be beauty. It can be your intellect. It can be a political cause. We'll make that an idol. It could be some social cause. We can make that an idol. Like I saw some people losing their walk with God over Black Lives Matter, which was crazy to me. That's silly. Yes, Black lives certainly matter. But if you're going to let a political movement cost you your walk with God, you're a fool. That's a foolish thing to do. You can advocate for justice, which the book of Amos is all about, treating people with equity and fairness and all that. Like, you can advocate for those sorts of things without losing your soul. We're a kingdom person first. Politics and everything else is secondary. Even morality or virtue or success in Christian ministry, we can make all of those things an idol. Can I tell you who's guilty of that all the time? Most pastors. They'll never admit it. But if a pastor's church would be suddenly stripped from him and he lose it all, most of these men would be suicidal. It's because it's not serving the people in a relationship with God that they love. It was the success and the appearance of being a good pastor that they wanted. All of us, anything can be made into an idol. This is my friends in mental health will like this one right here. When your meaning in life is connected to someone else's life, they call that codependency. That's a form of idolatry. Codependency, idolatry, they're one of the same. An idol is whatever you look at, and you are honest, in your heart of hearts, you look at this thing, and you say, if I have that, then I feel like my life has meaning. Then I'll know how value. Then I'll feel significant and secure. Anything that's in that slot aside from Jesus is an idol. I can tell you that something that I've struggled with is, for me, it was doing the work of, I've put the work of the Lord, I've put that in that spot. If I'm not doing the work of God, why am I here? That's not what God designed me for. That's idolatry. It should be, if I can't be in his presence and be abiding in the vine, where is my meaning? My meaning is from being in him. And that'll produce fruit in me. We make everything in idols. Oh my goodness. Yes, we do. Really, we're worshiping these things. Look, like an easy thing to worship is health and fitness. It's easy to worship. You know, how do I know? I'm in the gym lifting business and lifting weights. And boy, dude, going to the gym is scarily like church. You got to be consistent, right? And you got to consume the right content so you can get better at what you're doing. You got to pay money to go to the gym. That's like tithes. I'm paying money to go. And I'm having to deny myself to get better. Bro, listen, going to the gym is scarily like worship. And there'll come a time you're trying to just, and we will just, I want to take care of my body. My body's a temple. Like, okay, that's cool. But like something that God had to check me on is like, Devin, you will go to the gym late, but if the evening time comes and you haven't prayed, you'll go to sleep? What's up, big dog? You go to the gym at 10 p.m., but you're not going to pray at 10? Son, that's called an idol. If you're more motivated to go to the gym at 10 p.m., but, I'm too tired to pray. Lord, you saw my day. I was so busy, God. You see all the busyness. I couldn't possibly. That's an idol. It can be entertainment. How many people have wasted too much time staying up on Netflix or YouTube or whatever? Then that's your entertainment. But let's say you didn't pray that day. Before you put that show on, you're like, look, Lord, I'll hit you up tomorrow, Jesus. Look, this show this is a really good episode. That thing's an idol. Now, I'm not saying to get rid of the good things. I'm not saying that. I'm saying put them in their proper place. That the highest thing that should be making its decision making in your life is the word of the Lord. It should be God. If anything is more fundamental to our happiness, our meaning in life, and our identity, more fundamental than God, then that thing's an idol. I have moments of that. Sometimes I have moments where I'm like, well, being a father, being a husband, and being a pastor, that's what's keeping me going. But nowhere in that list did I say being a child of God. That's out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. I'm like, why didn't I say child of God? What's in me? My values need to be reorganized. Folks, I'm not preaching at you. I'm sitting right there and I am talking to me. This is a struggle. This is a struggle. You see, sometimes I write some stuff and I'm just like, bro, that was fire. I have one of those. I want to share one because it's so crazy. Because the scary part is when you're in the middle of the idolatry, you don't even recognize that you're in it. Is that one of the points that I skipped? It is. That's okay. I'll talk about it eventually in the future at some point, whatever. It doesn't matter. We'll get there. I'll save the fire for another time. Let's look at this. I got 15 minutes left. I got a point. Let's hit this. Modern idols. You know where these idols come from? They come from our hearts. Idols 3,000 years ago were built with our hands, with wood and stone. The idols we built today, they're built right here. Let's look at this, Ezekiel 14. Ezekiel 14. If you'd like to explore this concept at a deeper level, I recommend the book Counterfeit Gods by Timothy Keller. I have recommended it before. He treats this topic very well. So Counterfeit Gods by Timothy Keller. If you need that, again, I can push out in the Slack so we can have that recommendation. It's an incredible book. So Ezekiel 14. This verse would almost make you want to cry. Like if you really, really get what's happening, this is a crazy set of circumstances. Because but I'm going to spoil this for you before we read it. The elders of Israel, that's you in the story. That's me in the story. We're the elders of Israel. Okay, now that you have that, let's read this. Then some of the elders of Israel came to me, the me being Ezekiel, and he sat down, and they sat down before me. And the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Son of man, these men have set up their idols in their hearts, and have put right before their faces the stumbling block of their iniquity. Should I consult? Should I be consulted by them at all? Therefore, speak to them and tell them, thus says the Lord, any man of the house of Israel who sets up his idols in his heart and puts right before his face the stumbling block of his iniquity, and then comes to the prophet, I, the Lord, will be brought to give him an answer in the matter, in the view of the multitude of his idols. Crazy. Oh my goodness. Okay, hold on. There's one more verse. In order to lay hold of the hearts of the house of Israel who are estranged from me through all their idols. This verse has haunted me since I read it. If we don't properly deal with our idols, when you come to God in prayer, he said he's going to deal with you in view of the multitude of the idols that are in our heart. Have you ever had the problem that when you go to pray, you're trying to pray about one thing, but this is the only thing that keeps coming to your mind? You feel like this is the only thing that God is dealing with me about. I'm trying to pray about this. I'm trying to seek him about this, but this is the only thing that consumes me. Could it be that there's some idol there? There could be some sin there that we've placed in our hearts. We've set them up, and we're trying to talk to God, and the word that he's speaking to us is being filtered through that idol. It's impacting, it's skewing what God wants to say. He's speaking. You feel his presence. You feel the conviction. You feel him dealing with you, but it's skewed by what's in our hearts. Let's look at the New Testament. So I don't want you to think that I'm completely fabricating this concept. Colossians chapter 3. Colossians 3. We're going to make our way back. And then 3 and verse 5. Therefore, consider the members of your earthly body as dead to immorality, impurity, passion, evil desire, and greed, which amounts to idolatry. So this is not just an Old Testament concept. There's things that we worship as God that are not deities per se, but even ideologies and ideas. Those things can be gods or ideological gods. And so this concept that I'm going to share here, I am borrowing heavily from the work of Timothy Keller. I think the concept is God-inspired. I think it's helpful for us. He classifies idols into 2 categories: deep idols and surface idols. You see, the sin in our hearts, they start to affect your basic motivation and drives, and they become idolatrous. So we're humans, we're biological beings, and so because of that, we have basic drives that are to all of us. We have a desire for procreation, for eating, for drinking, for survival, like what it takes to survive. From that desire to survive and live, or just comes natural desires. Those are fine. Those are normal. You should want those things. But then sin comes and takes those basic human drives, which are good, and then perverts them. And so we start worshiping those drives. That's a deep idol. He gives an example of some. A deep idol for power. You have a deep drive. A lot of what we're not realizing it, but our desires are motivated by power. Another one is approval. I shared this like a year or so, probably over a year at this point, over a year. That's my struggle. Approval, a struggle for approval. And it manifests in many ways in my life. For some people, it's comfort. They will do anything to be comforted. And then for some people, it's control. And so, and these things, and what's interesting is that these things can manifest in, 2 people can be in the same situation. but because their drives are different, they'll respond to it. So let's say somebody has a desire for approval. They'll live a life of promiscuity because they want to be approved. They want to be seen as beautiful, seen as this, and this, right? So they might manifest as that. And what they'll do is they'll manifest that usually in compromising and carrying themselves in such a way to attract attention. Then there's other people who are motivated by power. And so they'll still have inappropriate relationships, but then they'll be promiscuous, but it's not through being alluring and having a bunch of people attracted to them. They'll say, how many bodies can I get? How many people can I? They'll put challenges for themselves. Oh, that's a Christian girl. Can I break her? Are they married? Can I wreck that home? It's a power thing. They want to have power over people. So both are promiscuity, but it looks different because of the drive, what's driving it, right? You can do the same thing with any situation, any sin, but the drives make them manifest differently. Power, approval, comfort, and control. We need to find out what's driving us. I know for me, certainly approval is a struggle that I have. But when we think of these sorts of idols, we usually think of the surface ones, right? That's what comes to most people's minds. Like things like money, spouses, our children, it can be success, all those other things. Those are just surface idols. And we make the mistake of dealing with the stuff at the surface, dealing with it at the sin level, but you're not getting to the root. If you don't get to the root, all you're doing is chopping down weeds, but the root system is still there, it's going to grow back. And so this is not exhaustive. I should devote a whole lesson to conquering deep idols, but I'll give you just a couple of points. All right? So how to conquer deep idols. First, you have to recognize the process. Recognize that it doesn't happen overnight. It's not going to happen overnight. If you're going to get the victory of some of the stuff, it's going to take time. And that's okay. Give yourself time. That doesn't mean justify, make excuses, and be sinful. Like, I'm not saying that, but give yourself time to heal. 2, identify what your deep idol is. Identify what it is. Identify how the sin in our life has perverted our basic human drive. Figure that out. Maybe you're not self-aware. Maybe you have a trusted friend that you can pray and talk through some things with. But not everybody's introspective. But you want to figure out what that deep idol is. Then you want to identify how it manifests in the different areas. Like, this is the example that I give. So I use myself as an example so you can see the process working, so you know what to do. And I'm not sharing my worst parts. I'm only sharing some of the bad part. I'm not sharing you the worst of my humanity. I'm going to deal with that privately. So like mine is approval. One of the way it manifests, everybody who knows me knows that when I'm comfortable, I'm very antagonistic. Very antagonistic. And the reason why I'm antagonistic is not because I even want to be, because when I'm at home with my wife, I can chill out quite a bit, unless Mercedes is around, because she's not my safe space. She's my sister-in-law. I'm way less antagonistic with Alyssa. It's because I'm not, that mask that I put on, I'm not doing it anymore. Antagonism is a mask. But the reason why I do that is because I didn't have friends growing up. And so I really want friends. I really desire friends. I desire companionship quite a bit. And so one of the things I do is I'm antagonistic and I push people away. And anybody who wants to be around me after that, I said, this person genuinely likes me. That's unhealthy. That's not healthy. That's not good. Don't do that. Just be kind. Have the fruit of the Spirit, right? But like, see, I've romanticized it. I've justified it, right? It's my deep idol. And I said, if they can push through it, this is a real one. They're my ride or die. No, I'm justifying a hurt. That's what I've done, right? So that's my issue. I have to work through it. Now, I'm still going to be antagonistic with everybody here because I do want space between me and the church. because I'm not attempting to be friends with any of you. I have to lead. And so I want space between me and the people here. But historically, that's what I've done. And ridiculous. It was a ridiculous thing to do. Or I would do that, or be intentionally as odd and off the wall as possible, to make people work for it. If you're gonna be my friend, you gotta work for it. That's weird. Don't do that. Just be yourself. And if people love that, they do. They don't, they don't. Right? And so that's just one way that's a little bit more mundane. That desire for approval also manifests in some really negative ways. Praise the Lord. I have to work through that too. And so you identify it. And so then you have to address it. It's a dual approach. You want to attack the surface and the deep at the same time. The way that you attack surface idols is with guidelines, guardrails, holiness, right? Like, let's say there's a young person and they're struggling with pornography or something, and for them it's a matter of control. The person's not out having sex. They're afraid of not being in control, but they're picking the video or the certain type of video. Let's say it's like dominatrix stuff, and this one person was really they have a desire for control, and so they're getting that fixed through the pornography, right? And so this person wants to get the victory over this. First, well, put software on your devices and stuff like that, right? So there's blocking technology. So that's taking care of it at the surface level. But at the deep level, if the issue is control, guess what you should practice in prayer? Surrender. Because the only way that you're going to take care of deep idols is deep idols are seeds. Seeds of idolatry produce the fruit of sin. So you have to replace the seed of idolatry, control, with the seed of faith. And the seed and the fruit of faith is righteousness and life. And so if your issue is control, what you need to work on is, one, you got to have a healthy relationship with God. And in your case, you said, I have to learn to surrender. You have to spend time in praying, asking God, your will, not mine, be done. For me, mine isn't control, but if it were, I would push the Lord. I said, Lord, give me assignments that I don't like and I don't want to do. I don't feel in control, so I can trust you. Lord, put me in situations where I can't control everything. Put me in situations where I just have to trust you. Teach my heart to trust you completely. And you take that thing to prayer and you really work at it. And you're spending time in God's presence, because remember, when we abide in the vine, we're spending that time in his presence. That's when the transformation starts happening. But it's targeted. Lord, I need that release. I need these moments so I can be set free. This is what I need. We have to get to the root of these situations so we can be set free. I'm out of time, but I'll read one more verse and then we'll be done. There is real ramifications to not conquering the idols in our lives. Romans chapter 1, verse 24. Therefore God gave them over to their lust, to the lust of their hearts, to impurity, so that their bodies would be dishonored among them. For they exchanged the truth of God for a lie. And they worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. When we fail to conquer the idols, they become the gods that we serve. And we are given, and this is the scary part, if you don't conquer the idols of your heart, God will not compete with those other gods. He will give you over to them. And the worst place that we can be is given over to the desires of our heart, because our hearts are deceitfully wicked. We don't know what we want. We think we know what we want, but if we're truly given what we think we want, we'll find our lives further from God than we ever intended to be, living and doing things that we never thought we would do, because he allowed us to have the idols that we so desire to worship. You cannot worship two masters. You will love the one and hate the other. You give it enough time. Because God, he comes in the competition with the idols in our heart. And if God is constantly stopping you from getting what you want, you'll like God a little bit less. You'll like the preaching a little bit less. The people of God challenge you, you'll like them a little bit less. Oh, I don't like this song. There's encouraging values that I don't want. You'll like worship a little bit less. And you'll find yourself becoming a hater of God, a lover of the sin that's in our hearts. So there's much more that could be said, but I think that'll do it for the evening. I'm going to do a dismissal for the online, and then I want to stop for questions. I think this is an important topic, and if there's clarifications, I definitely want to take the time for that. So thank you for joining us. Those that are online, I tried adjusting the settings, so hopefully you could hear me better. If not, I'm sure somebody will tell me. God bless you. I'll see you all Sunday.